All righty, let's go ahead and get started again. My name is Joshua Zeb. I am a financial educator at Prime Capital Wellness. This month, with our Prime Wellness webinar series, we're going to be going over protecting your future and why estate planning is essential for all. So I think this is such an important topic when it comes to your financial household, regardless of your age, regardless of your income. This is something that obviously affects all of us in some sort of fashion. So again, I think this is a very relevant topic for everyone. Joining me today, I have Nash Holm from our Omaha office. He's also very passionate about estate planning and making sure this is right for everybody. So we're both going to be talking about a couple concepts, a couple things that kind of keep in the back of our mind when it comes to either creating an estate plan or really kind of just knowing what it is and how we can maybe use that to our advantage going forward. So with that being said, what is estate planning? I like to think of estate planning as, preparing for those unexpected things that happen in our lives, whether that be an event of a death, incapacity, and so forth. So, what really happens to our financial household if something happens to our spouse or us, or maybe our parents if they're a little bit older. So we need to make sure we have some things prepared in advance in order to do so. So I have these 4 questions here that ideally we want people to be able to answer. Some of you might be able to answer one of these questions or maybe multiple of these questions. But again, ideally, we do have a resolution or a answer for all of these. So number 1, what do you own and who gets what after you are gone? Number 2, who will make decisions on your behalf if you are unable to do so? Who will take care of your children if you no longer can? And lastly, how do you want to be taken care of if you can't take care of yourself? So again, I'm just asking this a little bit more rhetorically, but ideally we want to be able to answer all of these to some extent. And I think this is so relevant too. I did a little research beforehand, especially on this topic of kind of more of the statistics in America. What I thought was pretty interesting that we see that a lot of the reasons why people don't do estate planning is either because they procrastinate, they think they're going to do it maybe later on, they'll maybe push it back to a later date, or maybe they just don't think they have enough assets to do so, which we don't think is the case. Everyone should have some kind of estate plan to some extent. So again, we think that we want to make sure we take action. We want to make sure we utilize the tools that are available, the documents that are available to put ourselves in a great situation going forward. So right now we're going to go through some common estate planning tools. There are multiple different tools we can, of course, go through, but we think these 4 are probably the most common that we see people want to set up. Number 1 is going to be that will, that last will and testament. So it's a legal document detailing your last wishes, distribution of assets, and really taking care of the minor if you have children and so forth. So ideally, everyone has some kind of will, a document that that you will have. Next, after that, will be what's called a living will, which is actually different from last will and testament. A living will is more on the healthcare side of things. It gives a healthcare professional a little guidance toward how you would maybe want to be treated if you weren't able to communicate or incapacitated. So like it says in the quotes there, advanced directive toward how you want to be treated. A great, an example of this would be, if you are on life support or not, is that something that you would still like to do? Obviously, or not. Again, living will give some directives to those healthcare professionals. The next 2 are what are called power of attorney. Now, power of attorney, I like to think about it as appointing someone to represent you essentially and to take action towards something. So there's a financial power of attorney, so someone who's making financial decisions on your behalf if you weren't able to do so, again, with maybe a lack of communication, or if you're incapacitated for some reason. So again, that's more on the finance side of things to, make sure you're paying your bills, make sure you're paying your mortgage, any of those outstanding financial obligations you might have, those are still going forward with the power of attorney. The other side is going to be the medical power of attorney. Now, with medical power of attorney, it's very similar. You're going to be making decisions, or someone's going to be making decisions on your behalf. If you're in the hospital and there's a couple of different ways you could get treated, ideally the medical power of attorney will make or take action or give some guidance toward what they think is best for your situation and so forth. So ideally, we think people should have these four. Again, these are probably the most common that we see people try to take advantage of course. There are a lot of different other estate planning tools. We won't necessarily get into all of them today, just because some of them can be so complex. But we do want to share one other one that some of you probably know of already, which is a trust, which is a legal arrangement established by an individual during their lifetime to protect assets and to direct their distributions after the grantor's death. The really powerful thing with the trust, or with a trust, it would be able to avoid the probate process, which Nash is going to go through in a couple slides. It might be able to reduce some legal fees as well, because you won't necessarily have to go to the court system with probate. Thirdly, there is some value of obviously having a trust and keeping all of your assets a little bit more private. That would be, of course, between the grantor, the trustees, and the beneficiaries, which is always very important for all of us, some privacy. And lastly, which is probably one of the more important aspects, is the distribution of your wealth over time. And that's something that a trust would be able to do. A couple of different trusts I think are probably most common and relevant. There's irrevocable trust, revocable trust, and a special needs trust. There are other trusts out there, of course. So one thing about the trust I would say is, if you're somebody who has a more complicated situation, or maybe you have an abundance of different categories of assets, a trust could be something that could be to your advantage, maybe saving some money, as well as thinking about the distribution strategy to your beneficiaries down the road. One thing I think people can do today, or even after this call, is beneficiary designations. This is a big part of estate planning, is really just making sure these accounts have a beneficiary on them, have someone appointed as someone who would receive the assets or benefits in the event of your death. Bypasses the probate process, which is a big pro to these. Examples, of course, would include life insurance policies, retirement accounts, IRAs, certain bank accounts, of course. So we always want to make sure that these beneficiary designations are added as well as updated. That's one big part of these, is if something happens in your lifetime where maybe you get divorced, maybe some changes happen in your personal life where you need to update that beneficiary, make sure it happens, right? So make sure all these things are up to date according to your standards. One thing too that I've seen quite frequently is people who maybe fill out one beneficiary designation, perhaps on their insurance policies, but maybe they thought that counted toward their retirement accounts too, or their IRAs too. That's not the case. We want to make sure that these beneficiary designations are all filled out per accounts we have. So I highly encourage you all to maybe look at these accounts, just make sure they all have up-to-date beneficiaries, or at least they're added on there. Really important for all of us to do so. Even if they're the same beneficiary, I think it's just good practice to have. Another thing about beneficiaries, you can designate a primary beneficiary, which is just like the name, the primary, or a contingent beneficiary, which I would consider more of a backup beneficiary if something happens to your primary. So again, very important aspect to estate planning is making sure these are added and updated for your accounts. I wanted to take a step back a little bit. And I know we've gone through the tools and a couple things to think about, but I wanted to maybe dive a little bit more into like what an estate actually is, so everybody understands that, as well as the probate process. I mentioned that before. That's a really important aspect to estate planning and those events, perhaps after you pass away. What does that look like? And then what about just in estate planning in general? Where do I start? Is this something that I need to do now? Is this something that even is relevant for me? So Nash, I want to bring you in here, and could you tell us a little bit more about what an estate is and what the probate process is, and maybe just make sure we all know and understand what the best steps are to making an estate plan.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. First of all, I'm excited to continue the conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today on this topic, why estate planning is essential for everybody. And like you mentioned, you've led us to a very important question: what's included in an estate? Well, everything that you own is included in your estate, both the things you can touch and the things you can't. On the left-hand side, you'll see tangible assets. These are physical things like real estate, vehicles, boats, collectibles, and other personal property that hold value. On the right-hand side, you'll see intangible assets. These are financial accounts and instruments that don't have a physical form, but often make up a significant portion of one's net worth. These include things like bank accounts, retirement accounts, investments, insurance policies, and even ownership interests in a business. The takeaway here is that your estate might be more comprehensive than you realize. A good first step in estate planning is taking inventory of everything that you own. The more complete that your inventory is, the more effectively you can align your estate planning documents with your overall goals for asset preservation and legacy. Now, on the next slide here, we'll look at what probate is and how it works. Well, now whether you realize it or not, you already have an estate plan. And the question is whether you created it yourself or whether your state's default laws will decide for you. That's where probate comes in. Probate is the court-supervised process of gathering your assets after death and distributing them to the right people. But here's the problem. Probate can be time-consuming, expensive, and emotionally draining for your loved ones. Probate also opens the door for challenges to your will, and depending on the state that you live in, it can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. There's also legal and administrative fees associated with probate that can chip away at your estate. So while probate is sometimes unavoidable, having the proper estate plan in place can help reduce or oftentimes even eliminate the need for it. Now, for these next 3 big questions, do you need an estate plan? When is the best time for you to start? And can you do it on your own, or do you need help? To address the first question, do you need an estate plan? The answer is yes. Regardless of your age, income, or family situation, having a plan in place can make a major difference for the people you care about. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but having something in place can spare your family from unnecessary stress, confusion, and sometimes conflict during an already difficult time. I'm sure you're already all familiar with the age-old saying, we hope for the best, but always plan for the worst. That's where estate planning comes in. Having an estate plan in place is one of the most thoughtful things you can do for your loved ones. Now, let's talk about how to actually get help with this. You certainly don't have to do it alone. Meeting with an estate planning attorney is one of the best ways to get step-by-step guidance, especially if your situation is a little bit more complex than most. But keep in mind that working with a professional can be expensive, and document creation may not be included in that initial consultation with your attorney. Now, for more simple situations, there are online tools available. These can be more affordable while still helping you build a very solid foundation. But the problem is that they may not address all the nuances of your particular needs. Either way, the key is to do something rather than nothing, and sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Nash. Yeah, I think that's so relevant here, especially when it comes to the assistance on maybe the first step of creating an estate plan. One other resource we didn't really put on there, but if you're working with a financial planner or an advisor, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to maybe get the ball rolling on creating an estate plan, or at least giving you some direction on what might be best for you. There's so many different tools, documents that you could, theoretically choose from, of course. So, what is right for your situation? Obviously, there should, maybe some online research would help, but working with a financial planner, advisor, or estate planning attorney could be very helpful for everybody. We do have some action steps for everyone to kind of follow when it comes to their estate plan. Again, we think these are all things that we can certainly do to put ourselves in a great situation. Number one, this might be the most difficult one, is just start a conversation with your family, your loved ones, your spouse, while times are good, of course. This is something I actually did 2 years ago with my family. We went through kind of our whole estate planning scenarios. So there's we went through all the scenarios, what happens, down the road. And I think it's not easy to do at the time, but it helped me out quite a bit to know what the next steps were. As Nash mentioned before, this would be such a stressful time as it would be if you were to lose a loved one. So ideally, we don't want to add any financial stress to it. So sometimes these conversations are a great way to start. Secondly, is just take inventory of all of your assets and debts you have. This can be as simple as, a Word document or Excel spreadsheet, understanding what the value of maybe your houses, your cars are, any of those intangible assets that Nash mentioned, like your retirement accounts or any other accounts that you might have. These are all really important to know and list it out all together. So maybe but maybe your children don't know. So, or maybe your siblings don't know. So again, very helpful for everybody. Number 3 is going to be determining your goals and wishes for your estate. Now, this question or this statement is more geared towards everyone has a little different philosophy of how they want to go about estate planning, especially when it comes to maybe legacy wealth or leaving assets to children or loved ones. Some people want to leave it all to charity, which is great too. So make sure you determine those goals and what you kind of perceive for yourself or maybe for your financial situation down the road, which leads into number 4, which is identifying and creating those legal documents that we spelled out that best spell out your wishes. There's so many different kinds of documents. There's those trusts, there's the wills, powers of attorney. So make sure that the documents that you fill out are correct for your situation. They cover all those bases. Remember those 4 questions I asked you at the very beginning. Make sure those are all answered. Make sure your loved ones are able to answer those as well. Again, these aren't very fun conversations to have, but I think they're very relevant and they just help out quite a bit when it comes to just an overall reduce in stress. One thing that we can of course do today or right after this call is just make sure your beneficiaries are up to date. That's one thing I'm very vocal about this year with my clients is, hey, it doesn't take too long to even review or look at. A lot of times it doesn't take much time to just add it on there. So again, covering all of our bases is just so important when it comes to our situation. And this is pretty relevant, I think, to everybody on the call today. So with that being said, we're gonna start wrapping up here. Again, one of those great first steps is communication. It's really understanding where you're at, making sure you understand, what documents might be right for you. Maybe you need to talk to your spouse first or siblings or children, whatever it might be. I just want to let you know that we're here to help as well. So if you work with a designated advisor or consultant, we are more than happy to sit down with you and run through some scenarios, maybe think about what documents you need or need to start working on for yourselves and your loved ones. Nash mentioned it before, but it's never too late, but the earlier the better, of course, too. So feel free to call us, email us if you have any questions regarding estate planning or any of the documents that we presented today. I think it's really important, again, for everyone to at least understand them and make sure we're able to answer those first 4 questions that I stated earlier. If you guys are aware, we do have this webinar series once a month. We do have our updated schedule for the second half of the year. So we do have our next one coming up July 30th, which is going to be going over retirement investing made simple. So we'll be going over some strategies to help maybe gear toward what retirement could look like, of course, but make sure we're all getting there in a proper way. So again, that's going to be July 30th at noon Central Time. I encourage everyone to register for it when you can. Again, these are recorded, so if you aren't able to make it live, there will be recordings sent out if you register on there. With that being said, I appreciate everyone's time, especially during the busy summer, to listen, and hopefully you learn 1 or 2 things about estate planning. And if you don't have an estate planning, hopefully this encourages you to maybe make that first step into maybe creating a will, or maybe updating your beneficiaries, or maybe it's just creating those powers of attorney. Maybe it's just a conversation you have with your loved ones. So other than that, again, thank you everyone for joining, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your summer. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.